So just a few quick words of welcome. Sorry about the weather. There's a limit to what we can do for now. Anyway, just a few words of introduction to, in a way, not to the people as such, but to the office, because it seems to me more or less the 10th birthday of the office.
Almost, yeah. Officially, yeah.
Right, so if officially it starts in 2001, we are 2011, more or less you're in the 10 years. So I think it is one of those nice things to kind of get a kind of cross-section of the thinking after 10 years, which is in such an interesting studio that you will tell the story differently than me, but it seems to me that the key point in the story is a kind of exchange that occurs, especially between Beirut and New York, because you have in common as partners the AUB, the great university, great school of architecture, graduating in 1997, something like this. And to graduate from that school is not like to graduate from another school in another city. 1997 in Beirut is particular. So you're coming here with all of this rapid history that Beirut is working with two timescales always, like an unbelievably rapid, almost embarrassingly fast transformation, political, economical, military, you name it, with also, of course, the ancient rhythms of the region of the Middle East. So this is quite a set of feelings to graduate with from a really super school. Then here, corrupting Stephen Hall for 5 years or so. Finally, he manages to lose you a little bit. Stephen being, of course, a great teacher here, but also a teacher in his studio, letting people in the studio have responsibilities they don't necessarily normally have. And if I understand right, you still work with Stephen. In other words, the line between being inside his office and outside his office is not a line that you have any respect for, either you or Stephen, which I think is a very beautiful thing, which meaning that you are still corrupting Stephen and he corrupting you. And so what you have then is a story of an office that has 10 years, which is a serious amount of time in human life, but is very, very short in the life of an architect's office, especially in the current economy. And through that time, the work, so beautiful the work, always making some kind of consideration of the relationship between culture and politics and the stuff of cities. The work is non-boring. I mean, this is really seems to be the main point of the work, to not be boring. I salute that. And non-boring and beautiful, apparently. But also, of course, there is a sort of confusion in the work, deliberate confusion between what's real and what's imagined. So projects that are very easily understood as kind of visions of hyper visions of hyper futures, like the offshore urbanism project, which seems to me honors sort of 1970s experimental architecture in a very strong way. And then other projects like the one I can't remember what you call it, the sectional one in the suburbs, where you sort of slice the insides of suburban houses from a sectional point of view, which are not so easily understood as in some utopian future. They seem to be actually really forensic work on the existing reality. So I think very nice the way this office confuses us between real and imagined. Anyway, just I think a very nice moment to hear what's cooking in the studio, and hope you come back every 5 years or so and give us a report from the front. But the front here is simultaneously in the Middle East and here. In other words, it's actually a double front. And I think this is what my only point here is, that this is a super interesting office because you can't so easily say where they are. And I think that's a huge advantage for an architect, to be coming from a direction that nobody expects. In World War II, you should come out of the clouds. In the contemporary environment, to come from Beirut is a very, very interesting position as an architect. And I think it's very, very nice for us that you are here. And I think on behalf of Stephen, also want to express our respect for your work. And, you know, it's nice that you're here. Welcome.
Just a couple of clarifications. We did start 10 years ago, but for the first 5 years, we were under the radar, if you want, because we were still working at the office of Stephen, so we kind of illegally established our own office
So
without him
you blew
knowing
our
it.
cover now.
And, and then when we won back in 2002 the Young Architects Award, we had to come out of the closet, so to speak. So we're going to share the podium between the two of us, and Ziad's going to start.
First, I want to thank Dean Wigley and Ben and the Architecture School for having us today. We can start right away, I guess. When in doubt, bomb Lebanon. If we look at the timeline of the political events in Lebanon, we see that since its formation, the country has witnessed conflicts more than 77% of the time since its independence. That's kind of 23% of peace. Lebanon has long been seen as a proxy, a battlefield for regional conflicts. So this is an easy map. You can see Lebanon there in the center. You can see the geopolitical players, Saudi Arabia, Iran, of course, Israel and Egypt. And now, recently, Turkey kind of stepping into the game in the area. With its religious population mix, it also has its own share of internal conflicts. This is a sectarian map of Lebanon. It's really abstract in terms of distribution of the different religion within the country. It's at a closer look, the map is much more pixelized, if you wish. But there are these really defined kind of geographic location of different religious groups in Lebanon. Sometimes described as a failed state, the country continues to experience a perpetual war interrupted by pockets of relative calm, usually accompanied with a fake sense of recovery. Throughout the years, wars continue to inflict and form the spaces of the city. War, in that sense, can be seen as an acceleration of urban processes. This lecture, instead of linking architectural production to its proper history of architecture, proposes to draw a parallel between architectural production and the political history in Lebanon. Architectural thinking and design become another means to read and rewrite the political spaces of the city. The lecture tonight is divided into urban observations of the city, paralleled with some of our recent work and not so recent work in Lebanon. But before it got trapped into this vicious warfare circle, Lebanon, we've been told, was a beautiful country. With its striking geographic and ecological settings, the way the mountain touches the sea, Lebanon's natural beauty has been repeatedly and hyperbolically evoked. In its heyday, Lebanon was referred to as Switzerland of the Middle East, Beirut being Paris of the East. As described by the sociologist Samir Khalaf, this rather accidental geographic determinism of the horizontal effects of the sea and the perpendicular effects of the mountain starts to shape not only the urban and the rural dialectic, but also the sociocultural characteristics of each. The adventurous city, which is open to the sea, was namely inhabited by the Muslim, Sunni, and Orthodox Christians merchants. And the haven, that is the mountain, was a secure place for minorities and dissidents like Christian Maronite and Druze communities. The civil war in the early 70s brought to the surface the schism between these groups, which erupted into violent conflicts. Underneath the continuous natural beauty, from the sea to the mountain, lurked a destructive and a divisive geography.
The evolution of Beirut as a port city and later the building by the French of the Corniche promenade on the sea gave the high density of Beirut its breathing space and spatial identity. The Beirut Marina, a mix of commercial spaces and an apartment building, is a project we're working now on with Stephen Hall Architects. The driving urban idea was to extend this linear corniche that you see in red, this public thread of the Corniche promenade, on top of the town quay. This is basically, we're doing an extension of the Corniche, enlarging it and creating a series of restaurants below that end with a building housing project at the end of it. Along the arc, which is articulated with water features and seating areas, this promenade then continues to the roof of the building as a large as the large ground rises up and opens up to the sea. This is the project currently under construction. The first phase, which is the restaurants area, is going to open in November this year, and the building later in a year. The building floors are then shaped underneath the roof with these irregular layers of slabs that open into balcony spaces, reshaping the typical Beirut balconies. The building reclaims the corniche thus on the horizon and opens it up again, which was broken up by the, you see in the lower part of the screen here, the breakwater, which kind of blocked the sea from the corniche. So by lifting up the building, it's kind of recreating this view onto the corniche, onto the horizon, sorry. And it basically opens up this sea to both the kind of local residents of the building as well as the public. The second project I'm going to show is called the Wonder House. In Lebanon, the mountain with its skiing slope and the sea with its summer resorts became a regional destination. An urban myth constructed to promote the tourism industry suggests a season of climatic overlap where one can ski and swim within a half-hour drive from the mountain to the sea. Wonder House is a hypothetical Lebanese house that takes this urban myth and scales it down to the domestic space. By reconstructing a promenade from outside the house, you park, if you see it in the gray area, you park your car here, you take a lift up to the mountain, and you take down an inverted slide back to the sea. The plan of the house was also generated by taking the Lebanese linguistic expressions that are spatial in nature, yet kind of linguistic in nature, but spatially contradictory and paradoxical. You have from inside to inside, which is kind of a linguistic expression, meaning that you use chronism or nepotism to arrive to your destination or goal. From outside to outside is kind of the inverse, whereby I got accepted to Columbia without using any pedigree, but just any nepotism, but just by my qualifications. And the third one is kind of a transactional expression of commercial transaction. So we took these expressions and we transformed them into an architectural manifestation using the revolving door as a spatial idea with a built-in inherent spatiality, which is the middle of this door. The idea here is that the plan is generated by an understanding of the revolving door, first as a kind of a combination of a spatial understanding from outside to outside, or by butting them together as a continuous inside, or by creating a wall around it as this kind of from here to here expression. The house became the champion door to the power 2, whereby the front yard and the backyard are collapsed, and the interior living quarters with the service quarters are again collapsed in a zapping circulation. This is a view of the 4 quarters on the ground floor, and you can go up to the top floor by using these 2 stairs here that take you up to a more open plan on the upper floor that can be subdivided based on potential domestic disputes that could happen. It's an interpretation of a Louise Bourgeois cell here, and the door the upper floor is made of a series of these doors that could be kind of relating to subdivisions on the inside. This is kind of a rotated perspective of the house from the 4 different angles, and the idea again, you park your car at the front yard, you take the lift up to the mountain, which is an upper garden or roof garden, and then you take the slide back down to the pool, recreating this urban myth from the mountain to the sea, and shrinking it to the domestic space. This is kind of a flattened plan of the house that expresses this circulation condition, and taken again to the level of a neighborhood, bypassing, if you want, the notions of fences and borders between neighbors. We're developing the same ideas now in a real project. This is a couple of shots for the model that we did. This is in the mountain resort, like a very private mountain resort in the village of Fara in Lebanon, whereby the same circulation ideas kind of are expressed using the roof as a habitable space on top.
The growing visibility and over-assertion of religious identities through religious structures is a residue of years of hostility among the different religious groups. This is a cross that was submitted to Guinness Books of Record. It was supposed to be the biggest cross in the world, only to find out that actually there's a bigger one in South America. So they ended up submitting it as the biggest illuminated cross, and it won. The Lady of Lebanon Basilica in Harissa, constructed nearly 30 years ago, was inspired by Kanzotange's Olympic Stadium, which is befitting for a church in Lebanon since religion is really the country's national sport. In response to the Harissa Basilica and corresponding to the new religious and power shift in the demographic balance, the recently completed Muhammad al-Amin Mosque, which memorializes the legacy of the assassinated Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri, shows the extent to which the religious buildings are still conceived to shape the civic and urban identity of the city. So this is an aerial view. The mosque is the blue circle that you see there. That's the dome of the mosque. The mosque stands out as a colossal isolated object and tries to compete with the Maronite Christian church just to the west of it. This is the Christian church. This is a picture of the Christian church behind the mosque. There's also a Greek Orthodox church to the north, a Greek Catholic church, and an Armenian church to the west. Nearby, on Corniche al-Mazra, stands another type of mosque from another political episode of Lebanese history. This one memorializing another political leader, the Egyptian Arabist nationalist from the 50s, Jamal Abdel Nasser. In contrast to Al-Amin Mosque, Abdel Nasser Mosque is physically integrated into its setting and appears as another vertical office building with a minaret attached to it, topped with a dome, mostly seen from neighboring office towers. The mosque contained the offices, headquarters, and the political operation of the Sunni militia Al-Murabitun during the Civil War. The mosque has long been celebrated by Beirutis as being completely built out of reinforced concrete to withstand aggression. Other programmatically hybrid mosques built around the same period, such as Imam Ali bin Abi Talib Mosque in Tarid Jdidi, with a kind of commercial base tucked into it, and Ibad al-Rahman Mosque in Barbour area, which is a multi-story building, are all nested into the dense urban areas of what used to be called Western Beirut neighborhoods. These Beirut mosques of the 70s and the 80s celebrated in their functioning a non-religious or a secular program. It is an expanded notion of the mosque that plays off the two possible translations of the word mosque in Arabic. It could be translated as masjid, which is a place for prostrating, or a jami'a, which is a gathering space. These mosques put more emphasis on the latter.
We are currently investigating further this notion of the programmatically and physically expanded mosque on two fronts. The first is at Yale University, where we are conducting currently a mosque design studio sited in the northern city of Tripoli in Lebanon. The project is located tangentially to the Oscar Niemeyer Fair, to the south of it. On another front, we are also in the process of finalizing an installation for the 2011 Prague Quadrennial of Performance, Design and Space. The Quadrennial is the largest exposition of theater design in its kind in the world. For that, we looked back at 1979, where Aldo Rossi described his Teatro del Mondo as a place where architecture ended and the world of imagination began. For the exhibit, we are conceiving of the expanded mosque as a performance space. Our proposal, Moscheo del Mondo, grafts the four remaining minarets from Switzerland onto the floating theater. In this scenario, the mosque travels from Beirut to the west, becoming a ghosted critique of Europe's flourishing Islamophobia. A geopolitical architectural performance, Moscheo del Mondo, conceived as a heterotopic space, provides a room to experience and debate political differences as it negotiates international borders between East and West along the Mediterranean Sea. For the exhibit itself, we are designing a prayer rug, which is the ultimate traveling mosque. The rug is a map that illustrates this journey into the Mediterranean Sea. The rug will be located in the exhibition space at an angle facing Mecca direction. People can then literally use this rug as a praying space, a contracted mosque minimized to its bare minimum.
During the Civil War, the Green Line acquired its label when shrubs and bushes sprouted along Damascus Road after years of neglect. The Green Line basically divides East Beirut, mainly inhabited by the Christian population, from the west of Beirut, which is mostly Muslim population. While public spaces were lost, junction, ordinary crossings, and battlefields between the two Beiruts and along the Green Line became landmarks. Two places became really infamous. The first one is it's called Mantiqat al-Khanadik, the hotels district, which is the upper left corner one. This is the Green Line. Basically, it ends in downtown Beirut, which was the no man's land area. And then the other junction is the lower right arrow, which is the Mathaf junction. It's the National Museum intersecting Corniche al-Mazra'a Road. Holiday Inn Beirut is located in the hotel district. It is a modernist slab building designed by André Wojcinski, who worked for Corbusier on l'unité d'habitation in Marseille. Finished and never occupied when the Civil War broke in 1976, its deep facade absorbs the total depth of the balcony, which is designed to have a massive concrete handrail, as if anticipating a destructive life of its own. As the Civil War took place in the streets of the city, it eroded the boundaries between public and private. Rooftops, opening in private houses and strategic buildings, became part of the logistic of combats. The 26-story tall modern slab building became the perfect structure suited for vertical combat zone. An allegory of the divided city, the building was occupied and split at the same time by opposing militias, fighting room to room, floor to floor. The combat streets of the city turned into corridors and stairways, neighborhoods into floors.
A few years ago, we were invited by the NGO As-Sabil to design a small public library on the Mathaf junction, which Ziad just showed. A couple of site photos, a site plan here. And this is the National Museum, basically, which is the Mathaf. The design of the library was organized as a circular form based on the alphabetical distribution of the stacks along the periphery of the structure. Circulation shortcuts subdivided this disk into three pie-shaped zones. You had the kids area, which is here, the lecture kind of room, which is joining two levels, the upper and the lower level, and a reading room above. The library floor tilts towards the existing Roman columns to create the entry below and weave a promenade along the perimeter leading to the public roof above, where a Roman mosaic floor can be viewed by the visiting public. The rounded and transparent shape stands in opposition to the Holiday Inn slab structure. It becomes the quintessential form resisting a front side or a back side, an east or a west, a form that can never be bisected in half or take any side.
Throughout the Civil War, the country witnessed a gradual destruction of Beirut downtown area, the country's undisputed common space. This is an old picture of Martyr Square, one of the most famous kind of public areas in downtown, before the war. But even before the war, the functioning of the public spaces of the city were in question. In 1928, the Place de l'Étoile, which is adjacent to Martyr Square, is perhaps the most visible instance of grandiose French urban planning superimposed over the area of the old city. The Parliament building, which is located here, is located here. This building at this location was intended to radiate its political primacy over the extended border of Greater Lebanon. The square was supposed to instill a civic spirit to the city. The star-shaped square, as it faces the religious reality of Lebanon, was amputated at birth. The two eastern arms of the star were obstructed by the presence of three prominent religious buildings. Again, that's the same Greek Orthodox building here, church, the Greek Catholics, and a wedge in between was a kind of Islamic Nuriya shrine, it's called. The already compromised urban gesture was further made obsolete by the clock tower filling its center and preventing any potential congregation in front of the parliament by filling its potential center of dissent.
The demarcation line of the Lebanese war between an East and the West Beirut is redefined and reintroduced through our competition entry for Martyrs Square. The demarcation line retains its latent polarizing nature, but channels its potential outbursts into athletic sports activities, literally recreating the wartime separation line as a line of conflict between two opposing sport teams. The unresolved tension between the different factions of the Lebanese society is thus acknowledged and made to find its discharge in a politically polarized yet non-militarized setting. Separating local confessional teams that are based on religious affiliations, you do literally have in Lebanon the Sunni Muslim soccer team, the Shiite soccer team, the Druze soccer team, and the Christian, and so forth. Or they could compete again as a national team against foreign teams. This line would epitomize thus the changing political landscape of our society, one that cannot find in the hijacked, divided political system a proper reflection of its aspirations. Therefore, lets those aspirations project onto the playing field. Inflating itself to become a performing arts stage, the line disappears spatially only to reappear again. Play Square, as we dubbed it, was sculpted with a multi-directional bleacher space and performing podiums. Through its depth, the arena performance space converts the site back to its historical program of hippodrome. At the northern end of the project, the project leaps into the water by introducing a mountain, connecting the square's green to the city's blue, which is the Mediterranean Sea. Again, this kind of play on the mountain and the sea. With the ongoing Lebanese dispute over recent history, as witnessed by the lack of an official history book that is shared by all Lebanese and that all could agree on, the Museum of Natural History, embedded in the mountain, would examine and document Lebanon in its regional, geographical, and natural setting, a fresh pre-colonial take at the Middle East. In its distinct figure, the mountain creates a new icon for the city, and on a more political level, confessional associations that were and are linked to geography, meaning that Sunnis, Muslim Sunnis, for example, when you say you're Muslim Sunni, chances are you're from Beirut. When you say you're Shia, chances are you're from the south. So there's a geographical link between the confessions and the kind of location in Lebanon. These kind of associations are subverted in this project with the introduction of a mountain in the city. The next, sorry, yeah.
So the Civil War created a fraction in the Lebanese society with two very different visions of Lebanon. One territory, however, remained common and shared in use between the two. This area here is the trash mountain created by both sides. It is located in the sea by the no man's land of downtown area. The Civil War destroyed most of the buildings in downtown area, a place that witnessed the fiercest battles. With the end of the Civil War conflicts in the 1990s, the buildings of importance were preserved, and the rest was destroyed and dumped into the sea, creating a landfill and expand the growth of the city into the water. So if you look here, this is the trash mound, and all this ground was claimed by basically the destroyed building from downtown area, along with buildings that were in bad condition, destroyed intentionally after the war. The trash mound will be transformed to become a park, basically. This past year, we were approached by Solidaire, the real estate developer handling the reconstruction of downtown, to develop a temporary exhibition center on this land, a land that is created from the rubble and the rubbish of the war.
The center is the first structure dedicated to contemporary art in the waterfront development. With a constantly shifting context on the outside at the urban scale, setting a new skyline for the city, and a constantly shifting exhibitions on the inside, the architecture is trapped in a constant state of limbo. The design of the skin for the structure was conceived as a custom corrugated anodized mirror aluminum. As a reflection, the building becomes an index for the growth of the city, a placeholder that derives its entity from that of the ever-changing context. Beirut finally sees itself in the mirror. The building, in that sense, becomes contextual by becoming its context, and at the same time excludes itself from that context. The mirror cladding refutes shadows to further accentuate the placelessness nature of the building, and the emphasis on the ever-changing surrounding and ever-changing weather. The building reflects a heterotopian condition that provides a space for self-reflection and a new critical view to the city. Working with the topography, the building sits in a reflective pool of water that further reflects both building and context into an immaterial state, just like the city that will become but is not yet. A bamboo grove to the north and a sculpture garden to the south frame the building, and with the wind create a constant movement of a second nature. The exhibition center opened last year, partially opened last year with a retrospective exhibition of a Lebanese-American artist, and has since become one of Beirut's most prominent art spaces. On the interior, an open space with flexible exhibition walls allows a maximum flexibility for the curators.
During the war, balconies and other open private airy places became bolted and shielded. Conversely, basements, corridors, attics, and staircases became spaces of shelter. The Lebanese building codes, in effect since 1940, defined the balcony as an extra outdoor space that is tabulated to be 20% of the floor area. With the end of the Civil War, enclosing the space of the balcony with glass remained a popular practice adopted by residences across urban areas. Illegally circumventing the law, the individual choice is to sacrifice the luxury of an outdoor space for the pseudo benefit of increasing the indoor space of the apartment with what is assumed to be a much needed extra square meters. In 2004, in an act of desperation from the municipality, an amendment to the building code has finally legalized the act of enclosing the balcony space with the use of folding glass curtain system. Apartment blocks today, if designed carefully, plan a balcony that is ready to receive the installation of that glass system and internalize forever the outdoor space. The once organic, sometimes enriching transformation of the city facades made by individuals' initiative became an orderly erasure of the city balconies conceived by policymakers and carried out by the architect. Today's hermetically sealed balcony indicates a potential loss for this remaining semi-public zone from the city. As buildings turn inward, the last hope of public life almost disappeared.
The Beirut Cultural Center is a new project that we are currently developing. It's situated north of the Beirut Exhibition Center, which we just showed you, which is here. Also in the landfill area of downtown Beirut. For this project, meant to be a temporary space for hosting large music events, our attitude this time towards the landfill was to follow a landform strategy by bumping the land up so that it houses the needed open large space below. The plane is then articulated through a stepping strategy, making the roof accessible and vertically appropriated. The project becomes an homage to the lost balconies of Beirut, with these linear, elongated steps negotiating the slopes of the roof and partially inflating to become balconies, a new space where publicness is reclaimed and where links are provided between the outdoor performances that would occur and those on the inside.
The extensive urbanization that Lebanon experienced throughout its modern history was not associated with a comparable decline in kinship and confessional affinities. Urbanization as a physical phenomenon was also not accompanied by a proportional degree of urbanism as a way of life. The ruralization of Beirut operates at two levels. First, by developing rural networks within urban areas. Different districts within the city are inhabited by different religious groups with affinities to their rural roots. Further patterns of segregation has resulted from the massive shift in population from east to west and from center to periphery during the Civil War. If you look at this map, it shows more how the subdivision is happening not only neighborhood by neighborhood, but almost kind of blocks by blocks. The second level, perhaps to the younger generation, is that city life remains a transit encounter sustained by periodic or daily visits to rural areas. So there is no permanent urban settlers. The modernization of infrastructure and the increase in roadways facilitated and managed the car in and out of Beirut which is becoming even more susceptible to this phenomena. A few years ago, a new highway opened linking Beirut to the northern mountains. This is the highway. You can see it here. This highway was soon to be dubbed the Fast Highway.
We were approached to design a house in Baghdad area, where the arrow is, a 30-minute drive from the center of the city, using this new road to the quaint village up in the mountain. The geometry of the house responds to both spectacular 180 degrees views of the mountains and the car drop-off roundabout access to the house in a series of land cuts that create an architecture tucked below the landscape. A simple sculptural move and landscape incision, the house becomes, through its geometry and its generative process, a hybrid inhabited landform. The house becomes indirectly generated as an extension of this transit car experience. This creates an inversion of the traditional agricultural terracing that you see most commonly in the mountains, which opens the house towards the views of the adjacent mountains. The roof sweep transforms the house from one floor to two floors and is formed by terracotta fins. This is kind of a flattening of the roof, that are interlaced with the greenery around, an merger of architecture again and landscape. Programmatically, the project's ground floor is its site plan. As one moves down from the bedroom levels towards the living areas below that open out onto the garden. From the entry on the ground, the driveway and the car become the main element of the site, while the architecture creates the backdrop and the bleachers set the stage for the vehicular access to the house. In this slide, you see the client showing the model of the house to his son. From below, the house is revealed as it opens up to the view, and from above, it's hidden from its neighbors.
On July 12, 2006, Hezbollah kidnapped 2 Israeli soldiers from the southern border of Lebanon with Israel, sparking what became known as the 34-Day War, or the July War. In Israel, it was called the Second Lebanese War, the first one being in 1982. During the war, 7,000 choreographed airstrikes were launched over Lebanon. This is kind of a map showing all the targets. And this is a map that shows that overlay that sectarian map of Lebanon with the targets. And you can easily see, if you wish, what was trying to be targeted. The south, which is mostly Shia population. The Bekaa, Baalbek, which is also Shia population. And these little dots there are all the roadways and the highways kind of connecting Beirut, north-south and east-west. And then there's this here, kind of intense circles there in the around Beirut area. The discriminate attacks on the western suburbs of Beirut were mostly peculiar. The misery belt around Beirut, called Dawahi or suburbs, along with the Palestinians' refugee camp and later on the deteriorating Armenian quarters, has historically been inhabited mainly by the politically underdog Shia population of Lebanon, migrating from the impoverished south. This is kind of an early picture of the misery belt around Beirut. In 1982, with the first Israeli invasion, Hezbollah militia emerged as a resistance power to Israeli occupation with the grassroots support in the western suburb. The western suburb started to be referred to at the time as Hezbollah suburb. Throughout the years, Hezbollah managed to thrive and expand its power on the physical space of the city. Political posters plastered the buildings, streets and squares were renamed based on martyrs and spiritual leaders. The district soon became characterized by high urban density, achieved through building zoning violation and illegal ground-up construction. This high urban density became the defensive shield for the space of such military and political organization now entrenched in the fabric of the city. Ad-Dahiya, or the suburb as called now, became the political capital of the resistance. This is the Dahiya quarter here, it's called Har Tahrik, where Hezbollah is kind of basing his structure. So it was not accidental that the suburb's urban density, the buildings in their own right, were the intended targets of the Israeli attack, civilian population being only a collateral damage. As you can see in this picture, before, after of the Har Tahrik area, and the amount of erasure of the buildings, kind of documentation usually used in natural disaster to trace the effect of the disaster on the area, I guess. So flattening the sector as opposed to hitting strategic targets was the intent. This kind of picture with in Har Tahrik. Next came the Israeli threat to attack another thriving urban center, downtown Beirut. The BCD was going under immense post-Civil War reconstruction effort, which Hezbollah leadership long considered as being an unjust development favoring the center of the poor over the poor peripheries. However, following that threat from Israel on downtown Beirut, Hezbollah issued his own threat of targeting the biggest city in northern Israel, Haifa. Urbicide, or the war on the urban, continues. 6 days into the attack, a ceasefire was announced, allowing foreigners and Lebanese with dual citizenship to evacuate by their respective countries. Using boats and barges into the sea, they left. The rest of the Lebanese were left on land.
Offshore urbanism, which is the last project that we're going to show tonight, became an evacuation plan for the entire Lebanese population in the case of yet another war on Lebanon. With this, an opportunity arose to reflect on the architectural as well as the urban as they relate to the complex social realities in Lebanon. This is a slide dating back from 1989 that shows kind of the continuation of a certain sense of normality during times of crises. Going back to this idea of a context in perpetual state of conflict, the question became, how can we work and live? Basically, how can we operate in parallel to a war condition without failing into a state of learned helplessness? The idea here that kind of what we were inspired by is the differentiation between two understandings of risk management. One that looks at risk as a possibilistic risk, which means that everything, anywhere, anytime is possible, and it's more of a state of panic that one finds himself or herself into, versus a probabilistic kind of understanding of risk, which means chances are you can calculate it more or less scientifically. Where are the areas that are safe, like in this slide, and where are the areas that are not safe? We suggested in this project a series of barges that are integrated with the coastal highway, and that would recreate a series of artificial beaches along the littoral. These beaches would retain their touristic potential as the evacuation takes place. The barges were engineered to connect to the inner secondary networks that you see here of roadways, which in 2006 were deemed safe, and unlike the targeted highways, were hard to paralyze. Once ready or populated, the barges depart, simultaneously dismantling the infrastructure behind in an act of temporary self-destruction. The programmatic aspirations of the project were paralleled with two precedents. The first one is Radio Luxembourg, one of the earliest commercial radio stations broadcasting in Britain. In order to circumvent the monopoly given in 1933 to the BBC, the radio moved to Luxembourg and maintained its broadcasting to the UK from without. The idea here is to be able to act on an urban setting that is restrictive and prohibitive in nature by subverting it externally. The second example, the Women on Waves Foundation, based in Holland. This organization, using abortion clinics floating on boats, travels to the international waters and docks along countries where abortions are still illegal, providing their services offshore. Similarly, the barges of the evacuation plan host social programs that make use of the migration aspect of the evacuation, shifting in nature and performance once reaching international waters, where the local constructs and laws are lifted. Taboos inland become addressed offshore. Like, for example, a chapel for civil marriage between couples of different religions, something that is still banned in Lebanon. The barge subverts with its social housing mix the clear-cut religious ghettos inland, and, inverted below sea level, takes the subtractive form from the horizontal plane of the sea. We will end here with a couple of slides from the project. This is a section showing the barge departing and the social mix that could occur between the different components of the society. This is a model we did for the Shenzhen Biennale in 2007, directly after the war. And these are the collage of the barges leaving the shore. Thank you.
Questions? Yeah.
I mean, we're actually doing now a project about the Holiday Inn. I mean, the question is more financial. I think it's owned by Kuwaitis, so it's not any longer owned by Lebanese. But you have a series of these architectural buildings that are very significant in nature and iconic to the city, like the Holiday Inn, like the Burj Al Moor, like several other structures that have a big potential in kind of giving us a better understanding on how to better deal in a post-war condition with the realities that are occurring. I mean, the question is, obviously, a lot of people still don't believe, and we are one of them, that we are living actually in a post-war condition. I mean, you still see every other day there's something happening in Lebanon. So it is these architectural moments that are ill-defined in a way that are the most interesting for us, and we are in the process of doing a project just to instigate the discourse about these specific buildings, because nothing is happening with them.
The barges project at the very end, perhaps I missed it. Was that a competition, or was there a specific group? Oh, thank you.
No, the project we did, two of L.E.FT's partners at the time were stuck in the conflict in Lebanon, and then after we left, we had to flee actually by land through Syria and Jordan. So it was a project that was done just as a reaction to that experience.
I mean, like the problem for us is that for the past, I mean, we know that it's this constant state of conflict, right? And we cannot be trapped in the kind of a mutual discourse between Israel on one end and Hezbollah on the other, and kind of keeping all the issues or the social taboos that are lingering in society without being addressed. So there is a multitasking that needs to be done at the same time, and this was our effort to kind of deviate from the petty politics, if you want, of the conflict, and kind of concentrate on actual political events or kind of social issues that in Lebanon that are never addressed because of what is perceived to be, for good or bad, I mean, like higher priorities in everyday life.
I wanted to ask perhaps a more theoretical question, which is, I noticed that key points, implicitly as well as explicitly in your work, you deal with art and the dialectic between art and architecture. You mentioned Marcel Duchamp and the 11 Rue Larrey. I remember you once told me that you were partly inspired by Anish Kapoor in the case of the reflective surface. So would you say that there is, on the one hand, a kind of programmatic dimension to your work as driving your work, and yet also something which is not programmatic, which is not functional, which is aesthetic in a certain way?
There is, but we try to look, I mean, like we always try to, we are stuck at the conceptual stage of art. I think this is like a very instructive phase that architects can learn from, because, I mean, at one point it was driven by a certain understanding that the artwork has a kind of an important idea behind it, regardless of the shape. We obviously aspire to, I mean, I was joking when I was saying beautiful, right? But we do want to be at a formal level. We do want to be pushing the envelope, but it's more interesting for us to understand the idea that could help us. I mean, maybe we use it as an excuse to generate the form, but we do believe that there's, at a certain level, kind of a social aspiration to the architectural work that could be beneficial in form producing. So in that sense, we are very interested in conceptual art.
So your work is interesting. You propose in a lot of ways that conflict can be resolved through landscape, through the architecture becomes hidden in landscapes below green roofs, and almost kind of disappears into a sort of commentary. I'm wondering if you could talk about what you found in the ability of architecture, specifically architecture, to resolve conflict, and relating to landscape, and why you perhaps are favoring landscape, because it's apolitical maybe, or something like this, versus sort of architecture, and why the architecture, like this project, which I really like, that's too loud, why that moves back in a way, why the architecture has chosen to step back deliberately to landscape. I wonder if you could talk about that dialectic.
I mean, I'm not sure if land and landscape is apolitical, like you describe it, especially when you talk about landfill in downtown Beirut, for example. It's filled with history of the conflict itself. So in that sense, I don't think land forms and the land gesture that we kind of employed were politically objective, or trying to be politically objective.
Why landscape over architecture? Why in the projects are you choosing to sort of accentuate, like you talk about landforms, about living in landforms, living below landforms, about installing a mountain to reconcile these different groups, the sport field, the program of the football field. It's a sort of landscape of bringing these disparate groups together. But I'm wondering why not so much architecture? What about?
I mean, it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting comment in the sense that maybe we are shying. We're not necessarily shying away from producing architecture, but we are trying to see if we don't look at the object from an aesthetic perspective, and hence maybe the landscape at that level is overshadowing the architecture. But what if we kind of reduce the intensity of the architectural in terms of its aesthetics? Maybe we can look at the typological layers that are embedded in it, and that are kind of where the social and the political are housed, for example. Maybe that's kind of a part of it.
Going off that, it seems to me that in your projects, the land is actually the political element. That's why you emphasize it, which makes me confused actually by the last project, the barges, because in a sense it is an artifact that is fleeing the land that you treasure and are in all the other projects accentuating as the political element. So I'm confused as to why the last project seems like such a.
We don't want you to be confused. The idea is that, I mean, like partly, I mean, maybe we didn't mention it, but the idea that you can take the beaches out from their kind of normal setting if you want, and then travel with them. That's partly kind of taking the actual landscape and working along, I mean, like cherishing it so much that you are taking it with you, you know. And this is part of maybe, I mean, like I guess part of us being a diaspora in a way. We are kind of more attached to it than anything else. I think that's kind of the case for us.
That's an ancient practice to bring a piece of the earth
with you.
when you're a diaspora.
Yeah.
I think that in a way, because of the lack of public spaces in Beirut, the responses of projects that provide a certain sense of openness and possibly maybe an interaction and discussion kind of fit within the current urban condition of the city.
I mean, yeah, this is something that we're trying in every project. I mean, the notion of public space is very divisive in nature. I mean, even that is not that easily understandable by the clients, for example. I mean, in the Beirut Marina project, one of the big issues is how to separate between the private residents of that project, which are paying premium amount of money to be located in that location specifically, and the kind of the extension of this corniche that is proposed. So kind of there's a sectional interplay that tries to marry both the private and the public in that case.
My question would be, because when listening to you, I can feel that the social context is really taken into consideration, but then the concepts you're proposing are very, I don't know if I can formulate it like this, but are very Western. When you talk about heteropia, when I see images that look a little bit like Super Studio or references like this. So my question would be, how do you understand how the context of Beirut is nourishing your projects?
I mean, first we have to disagree that these concepts you describe are necessarily Western. And most of these work that maybe we appropriate or we kind of draw parallel with, we believe they have kind of a universal truth to them that could be applied east, west, north, south globally. So there should be a differentiation between what is Western and what is modern, I guess, in that sense. And modernity, I think, is desired everywhere into the world, especially in the Arab world, as you can see now recently happening in the last 10 days, maybe, with 10 revolutions kind of erupting in different parts. I mean, taking this example for a second, people always, on the left here in the state, always criticize like the Bush administration, how they're trying to impose democracy, that they shouldn't impose Western style, American style democracy, but then only to find out now that they want democracy. Not to say that the way it was approached was correct, but democracy or the freedom or liberty or whatever, these are all kind of universal values that people seek all over the world. So this is maybe a more global answer to your question.
I mean, the notion of context is kind of primordial in our practice. We do perceive ourselves as contextual architects. But for us, context is not necessarily the way we're trained to see it as a visual aesthetics of the kind of building blocks that you're working around or within. The idea is that how can you surface the more latent, if you want, kind of notions or maybe specificities of societies that you can use regardless whether you do a traditional looking building or a modern looking building or a Western, you want to call it Western building, you know. So it's not for us, I mean, we don't have a problem like like appropriating Western kind of strategies, if you want, of form making, as long as we're approaching it from a site-specific kind of social compositional project, or through the typology, through the program, or through the functionality of the project.
Thanks. So it was particularly with their barge project, I couldn't help but thinking of notions of piracy, and not piracy like raiding ships off the coast of Somalia or buccaneers running around, but escaping the boundaries of sovereign legal systems. And so I'm just curious if you might want to elaborate on the idea of a sort of pirate architecture where you're escaping, using your design to escape legal structures.
Yeah, I mean, the Radio Luxembourg is the beginning of pirate radio, actually. So it plays definitely along these lines. You know? And the interesting thing, we're developing now another project for the Palestinian camps in Beirut, and we're kind of using similar, if you want, strategies of how architecture can be, because it's a very contentious issue in Lebanon between the Christians and the Muslims, playing off of it to kind of secure a better political position between themselves. And at that level, at the end of the day, the Palestinians, for example, in Lebanon are living in dire conditions, right? So, it's obvious for us as architects to, we're not going to provide solutions, but at least through our project, potentially start a debate of how can we think, maybe appease everybody, but at the same time, create a better condition for the people living there. And in that sense, architecture that can play within the legal with the legal boundaries, if you want, or is not necessarily something that can be easily accepted in Lebanon. And at that level, you need to kind of subvert it in some way or another. And like these offshore projects, similar to the offshore urbanism project, could be an interesting way to look at it.
I'm wondering if you'd talk a little more about typology and demarcation. One of the things I think is amazing about Beirut and about Lebanon is these different social groups, the incredible cultural diversity that's there, but also this green line, of course, that was of course an amazing demarcation of the city, of the urban space. And you talked sort of answer to my question, answer some of these other questions about typology. Of course, you made the reference to Al-Rossi. And of course, typology is incredibly marked in a way, and Rossi's project is incredibly marked. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about demarcation in a sort of pluralistic, or your sense of it, regarding Lebanon, and how that relates to typology, which is a sort of markation a sort of isolation of these things, and how that works in your work.
And I mean, I'm going to give, maybe I'm thinking about two examples from our projects. One is the Wonder House, where if you want kind of this new typology of kind of from the center out and from the outside in, if you want, creates what we call a potentially dangerous space, in the sense that it could go off in any direction. It could be created as a demarcation line or as a line of unification within the household itself. So we're trying to look at these instances that are uncomfortable in the architecture, right? Of how you can misappropriate, in a sense, the architectural production, but which makes it, in a way, kind of less digestible as a proposition, you know, and it's not like looking at it from a very superficial visual project. The more we go into the typology, it could go into a demarcation project, meaning subdivision on the inside and creating these barriers between the household itself, the couple in that sense. Or it could go in another direction. And this kind of uncomfortable condition is something that is interesting for us. The Mathaf project, which is the library, in that sense, kind of negates any possibility of demarcation, although it sits on the demarcation line. So yeah, from project to project, I mean, these instances play out differently within the practice.
So I think maybe that's a good, super interesting question, and the usual bad wine is waiting for us, but I just really want to thank you for the lecture, and also in case the audience doesn't know, I could imagine that we are the victims of a conceptual experiment here. They give this lecture in New York, which is only about the projects in Beirut, but the next lecture they give, which would be in Beirut, would be only about the projects they do here, and you would be shocked at the difference.
Yeah.
Totally shocked.
You will be standing
No, we
here
do. I mean, like, we are interested in the same notions.
Different clothes, everything.
Yeah. Different haircut.
You notice that when they answer the question, they all lean forward, in that one they lean back. Architecture would not hurt anymore. Architecture would be like...
But it's interesting. I mean, it's very interesting for us because with the same topic, I mean, we know more about Lebanon than we know about New York, you know. But I mean, we have in a couple of projects that we did about the States here, we were able to touch on the same issues that we are interested in Lebanon, but kind of in New York. And on the 23rd of this month, we're working with Dilros Kofidi on a very interesting project in Levittown. So with Droog also from Holland. So you can go to the website of Droog and check it out. And you can go to Levittown also for it.
You can go to Studio X.
Studio X.
Columbia,
Exactly.
and
Exactly.
hear about it, and then you can go to Levittown.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you.